Yo, we are back again with another little tutorial. This time we're going to cover how to use the WordPress post editor to get web standards compliant results on your pages, and also really to highlight the gotchas, the little stuff that the editors will do to your site that you may not want them to do. There's lots of little stuff you need to know to be able to use it most effectively, and so I want to cover that stuff. And like I said, I want to show you what you need to look out for, these circumstances where you're going to get results that you don't actually want. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to pop over here. So here's this page of content. We're going to pop over to the editor, and I'll actually pop it over into visual mode, which is what most people are using. And of course, I'm also using the classic editor here. If you are using the Gutenberg editor, which I have another video about why I do not recommend using the Gutenberg editor, but if you're using the Gutenberg editor, you still have a lot of these same commands, these buttons and stuff in the toolbar for like paragraph blocks and things like that. So you can still access most of this stuff, and it actually works the same way in Gutenberg. So the gotchas and stuff that I show you here are going to be applicable if you're using that environment. But like I said, I don't recommend using the Gutenberg editor, so that's why I'm going to be using the classic editor in this demonstration. Okay, so the first thing we want to look out for is the use of these alignment buttons. I see this an awful lot. Specifically when centering. I think that's probably the number one application for using the alignment stuff. Somebody decides that this paragraph, for example, should be centered. So we'll do that. We'll center it. And we're going to flip over to the text editor to see what happened to make this centered. Okay, I'm going to separate this out so we can see it. Here's the paragraph that just received that treatment. And what I want you to notice is this parameter that's been added to this p tag. P tag's a paragraph tag. It's an HTML element, very basic. But this style parameter that has been added to it, this is known as inline styling. Okay? So inline styling of this nature is considered a big no-no from the perspective of web standards. So like Google doesn't want your pages to include inline styling. I can't say for sure whether or not it's going to give you a rankings boost if you have it versus don't, or like a penalty if you have a bunch of inline styling. But I can say from a practical perspective what a disaster inline styling truly is. And the reason why it's a disaster is because you have, and this is going to be a theme of this presentation, but what this is now a customization touch point. So instead of having a class or something that can be applied to this and also to other elements, okay, and so if you have something that's applied to multiple elements and you change it in one place, like within your CSS, for example, it will propagate changes out to all these other elements. But when you create an idiosyncratic touch point, idiosyncratic customization touch point, which is precisely what inline styling does, you can't change a lot of things at once and have them all react the same way. And so in an environment like that, if you ever want to make changes, you have to specifically find this and then either remove this or make it do something else to get the results that you want. So this is creating additional workload in the future. That's really why inline styling is so bad and why it is considered a non-standardized practice with building web pages. So you don't want to do this, style text align equals center. So the next question is, well, why does the editor work that way if this is not what you would actually want? That's a great question. And the reason why it works that way is because from WordPress's perspective, they have to consider you using an infinite variety of themes and an infinite variety of plugins as well. And all of those things can affect your operating environment differently. So the only bulletproof way to get the editor to give you what you want is centered text. The only bulletproof way for the editor to be able to do that is to inject this undesirable inline styling. And so really it's a wrestling match between, well, WordPress wants to give you what you want, but at the same time, you probably want your pages to be as standards compliant as possible, and therefore, and also retaining future flexibility and not creating these customization touch points. And so, but WordPress didn't give you the option. It didn't ask you, hey, which outcome would you prefer? Which way would you like this to work? They just made it work to give you the results you want. That way people complain less, and there it is. But as we can see, there's an insidious underbelly to this with some undesirable outcomes. So that's why it works the way it does. But now the question is, well, how do we get what really works? How do we get the right answer? And the way we get the right answer within the context of most themes is simply to use styling that is supported by your theme. Now, obviously, this is sort of not bulletproof as well, right? Because one theme might do it one way, another theme might do it another way. And so therefore, if you do everything to cater to this current theme, and then you change your theme in the future and it doesn't support that, well, you still have idiosyncratic touch points. They're just not inline styling. It's like, it's still a sin, it's just not as much of a sin. But the results for you are still the same. You have a lot of crap you now have to tend to if you want the right results on your site. And so my answer to this is sort of a tough problem to solve, right? Because you can't just force everyone to use the same syntax everywhere. I can't force every theme to do what I want it to do. So my answer to this, I have the Focus WordPress theme. That's my product. So I really am maniacal about having standardized stuff within Focus that you can use so that it sort of eliminates these concerns that I brought up. So the way I would do this is class equals center, and so this by itself doesn't mean anything. If your theme doesn't support this, well, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to center, the text here. But if it is supported, then this is a very bulletproof way to and it's also when we use natural language here to describe what's going on, p class equals center, doesn't matter who you are, you could look at this and say, I think this probably means it's supposed to center the text of that paragraph. Okay, so this is an intuitive way to do this, in my opinion. And this also, the presence of the class isn't as big of a penalty per se as using inline CSS styling, which we know is a big no-no. So flip back over to the visual editor, we see that we actually get the same result. We get centered, but this is done now in a way that is more proper and standards compliant. Let me see here. I don't remember whether or not that functionality is in there. It's not. So basically these alignment buttons within the WordPress editor are a do not use. You just can't do it because it's going to inject inline styling. So that's a big no. So we do not want to use the alignment buttons. Whenever you want to center something, the best, most bulletproof way to do it is to flip over to the text editor, identify the piece of content you want to center, and add class equals center. Now this is really just academic. The way Focus works and the way I think themes and templates probably should work is that you would never actually want to go in and center any element specifically. You really just want to be running your site in a design mode or in a setting that centers things that need to be centered and doesn't center things that don't. With that said, I use some editorial centering. I don't know if I have a good example for you here. Let's see, we can pull up another one. We'll go to the Focus product page. The only times I use contextual centering, so the only times I would actually go into the editor and make the changes that I showed you in the editor there by adding the center class, is on something like this where I've got a caption, and I feel like to fit with the flow of this page, this caption should probably be centered. So if we look at what the HTML is here, we can see that I've given this a class of caption and also a class of center to center it on the page. Okay, so these circumstances don't come up that frequently, but when they do, I pop over to the text editor, I locate the item I want to center, and I add class equals center. Okay. Another thing, there's some legacy centering, legacy means of centering content within HTML, and that's something like this. There used to be tags, HTML tags, that actually caused centering. But as you can see, it centers the text. So browsers still render and respect the center tag. However, with the advent of HTML5 and CSS3, the center tags are now considered deprecated and therefore should no longer be used. So if you were going to have a web page that was perfectly compliant with whatever the web standards are today, then that markup should not include the center tags that you see here. And also, this is persistent. the presence of the center tags is persistent. This text, no matter what sort of theme you're using, is going to be centered if you use the center tags. So it doesn't matter, like if you use the class setup that I described up here, or that I showed you just a little bit ago, if your theme doesn't support the center class, well, this text is not going to be centered. So that might be something for you to consider. You may want to use the center tags so you're not at the mercy of whatever theme you're going to be using. But that'd be an editorial decision because, like I said, this is no longer considered a modern piece of HTML markup and, in my opinion, should not be used. So you're going to have to consider what your options are there and then choose the best approach. My conclusion is that this is the best approach to use right now, and so this is what I do on all of my pages. Next, when we have bold text, so I'll make some text in this paragraph bold. We'll go to the visual editor and do it because that's what most people do. We'll select this right here. We'll bold it. Okay, there it is. We'll flip over here and see that the element that was bolded, or the sentence that was bolded, now has these strong tags surrounding it. Now, if you're an old school HTMLer, you may have seen in the past the use of tags like this, B tags, and likewise, you may have seen the use of I tags to specify italics. So we'll flip over to the visual editor and see. So the editor has respected this. Browsers will respect the use of the B and I tags, but web standards, for whatever reason, this has evolved this way because bold and italic was too specific. They pulled back on the specificity of those tags and now have strong and emphasis. So emphasis tags, EM, this text will be italic. So you see, they work the same way. Strong and M work the same way as B and I. The problem is they're more verbose. It's not really the problem, just the reality of this is they're more verbose. So I don't love that, but the fact is this is the web standard now. So you really want to be using strong and M and not B and I. If you use the buttons in the WordPress editor, you're going to get strong and M. It's going to do the right thing, but I can't tell you how many pages I look at that people who sort of like have a very perfunctory knowledge of HTML, for example, they will use these in their text. Technically, that is not up to the current web standards. So you're supposed to use strong and M instead of B and I. Something to consider. I think it probably doesn't matter in the end, but most themes, plugins that inject CSS onto your site, they're going to be using the web standards version, strong and M. So if you want the maximum compatibility and future compatibility for your content, you should use the strong and M tags instead of B and I tags. All right? The next point I want to make. When you are composing content, composing your posts, one thing I very frequently see is I want a huge heading. And so I'll select it, and I will choose heading 1. We'll flip over to the text editor and see that this huge heading, which I'm again going to space out for clarity, now is surrounded with H1 tags. Let's save this. Here's the deal with H1 tags. There's a long-standing legacy thing in sort of the way SEO and HTML have sort of evolved together over the last 15 years. It used to be that you only wanted one H1 tag per page. And so in this case, we'll view the page source. The H1 tag is actually the headline of the article. So once upon a time, this would have been the only H1 tag you wanted on a page. With the advent of HTML5, browsers and search engines like Google said, okay, if we will now allow you to use multiple H1 elements per page, but each entity on the page, so in this case an article, the article on the page, which is this whole thing, all the text, this entity should only have one H1 tag associated with it, which is currently the title. So therefore, to use an H1 within the content would still be a violation because it's two H1s within this local item on the page. In this case, there's only one item on the page, but you get the idea. You're only supposed to use one H1 element that is taken up by the headline, and so therefore, you wouldn't want to use another one inside the content on that basis alone. The second reason why you don't want to do that is because any good theme, especially Focus, for example, has calibrated your typography by using a typographic scale. And the typographic scale, contains 6 sizes. This, the H1, the size that gets applied to H1 is the largest. H2, which you see here, is the second largest. H3 is the third largest. There's an H4, which you don't see, which is the fourth largest. Then your body text, like the normal text on the page that makes up most of the page, this is the 5th biggest size. And then the smallest size is something that you see like you see here in the byline. We saw this on this other page within the caption. It's like an auxiliary size that's smaller than the main text that is sometimes useful, for example, in bylines or captions. And so by using another H1 element within your content, well, this size element is now competing with this. And to me, they're both conveying this signal like, hey, this is the most important thing, this is a big heading, and so is this. So which of these two is more important? We don't really have a good answer for that. And that's sort of what Google says about using multiple H1s within a particular localized block of content. Why it doesn't want you to do this is because the machine that's reading this, the crawler that's looking at your page, cannot say this is the most important or this is the most important. It doesn't have enough information to be able to say that one's more important than the other. So you don't want to leave the machines guessing. You just want to tell them straight up, okay, this is what it is. So using H1 within your content, then, is a violation of modern web standards. So don't do it. And then the last thing I want to say, I've already sort of touched on this, and the reason why I made this video is because the main reason why you want to pay close attention to what the editor is spitting out and maybe giving you some unintended results. The reason why you want to do that is because it might be setting up what I call idiosyncratic customization touch points that will need to be addressed at some point in the future. So consider this. Your site is what it is right now. It looks the way it looks. At some point in the future, you may want to change your design, change the platform on which the whole thing runs, that type of thing. Every little thing in your content that's like this, class equals center, but really the inline styling stuff I showed you earlier, and even the use of shortcodes. There's a shortcode in here, which is why I added this to this little post so I could explain this particular concept more clearly. And I'll show you in just a second what this does. But even the use of stuff like that is truly setting up an idiosyncratic customization touch point, because if this thing is not supported, if this shortcode is not supported by whatever your environment is in the future, it's not going to render as what it's supposed to. It's just going to render as literally this within your content. That's not going to be what you want. So you're going to have to go back into this post, edit it, and figure out a way to get that to work the way you want, or else just remove it. So obviously that's not ideal, and I want you to be cognizant of the fact that you might be setting up idiosyncratic customization touch points within your content, and your goal should be to minimize the amount of those that you set up. Okay? Ideally, you want to keep it to absolute 0, but the reality of running a WordPress website is you can't really do that. You're going to have to make some concessions there. You're going to have to put some stuff in your content, to get maximum flexible results. You're going to have some stuff in there that is truly an idiosyncratic customization touch point. But ideally, these things would follow a pattern so that you could then go into your pages or whatever, search for a pattern that exists, and it's going to show you exactly those pages, and then you can go hit each one, boom, 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 and fix the problems that your site has as a result of these idiosyncratic customization touch points. Now, this may seem like a neither here nor there issue, but like with my site, DIYthemes.com, I went last year. I had to go through every page of my site, and over the whole site, there's like 857 pages or something, and remove a bunch of idiosyncratic customization touch points that I had set up over the last 12 years. And this is just the reality of running a website. But each time I go through this process, I reduce the customization touch points just a little bit more, and a little bit more, and my site keeps getting better over time. But the only way that happens is if you're cognizant of these things and you're actively making changes that reduce that reduce the customization touch points. And especially if you are someone who is a freelance, developer or designer, or you work at an agency, this kind of thing, like your MO should be to always reduce the amount of customization touch points, because number one, you're doing your clients the biggest favor by doing that. But number two, that keeps your sanity when you're working on these sites. It makes your job easier. So there's every reason to want to reduce idiosyncratic customization touch points, especially those that occur through the use of the editor. And there's no reason to really, there's no justification for just having this profligate mess of these things in your content. And so this really takes us to another point that is big time in the WordPress ecosystem right now, and that is the use of page builders and themes that include page builder type functionality. These things all rely on the use of idiosyncratic customization touch points. It's a real disaster. So if, let's say you're using Divi, the most popular WordPress theme in the world right now, and I just look at Divi and I think every site, every page that's been created with Divi has created a ton of idiosyncratic customization touch points, and it's really just a complete disaster. So I just look at this and I see its popularity, and all I see is all the work and all the crap that we're all going to have to undo at some point, because this is the way sites have been built. It's a real disaster. Every time you create a page with one of these page builders, you go in here, you click onto that mode, and it does whatever it does. It's setting up a bunch of stuff like this shortcode reference, things that are equivalent to this, and also to inline styling, inline CSS styling. And it creates what's called a dependency. Each one of these things is dependent upon the software that you're running right now. And if the software that you're running changes, you're going to have to drag along these dependencies or figure out some way to accommodate them. From a design development perspective, this is a total nightmare and just the worst. And it's very expensive if you're a website owner who wants to fix these types of problems or has to confront them in the future because you have changed your environment and you now have no choice except to confront them. This becomes incredibly expensive. So it's in your best interest to reduce your costs over time. Listen to this cat fight out here. Oh, goodness. I got a neighbor cat coming over here, and my cat hates it. Anyway. Well, that's a good end to the video, because it's pretty much done anyway. But the bottom line is, these page builders and stuff, the cat, set up idiosyncratic customization touch points that are just a complete disaster. And so, take the advice I've given you in this video, think about reducing idiosyncratic customization touch points, and your site is going to be easier to run and cheaper to run over time. And I'm just telling you, once you have to confront this stuff, what I've told you today is really going to matter. I've gone through this personally, and it's a painstaking mess to try and undo some of these sins that the WordPress content editor can makes easy to commit. Okay? And the page builders are even worse. They take that up to a whole nother level. So my recommendation is for you to be on guard and to use the tricks I've shown you here today to make sure that you can minimize your customization touch points. All right? Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.